What happens when the most private betrayals are put on display for the whole world to see? At the glittering heart's embrace. Charity Gala in New York City. A night meant for philanthropy turned into a spectacle of scandal. All eyes were on Amber Collins, the stunning young woman on the arm of billionaire tycoon Richard Vance, and the jaw-dropping diamond and sapphire necklace she wore. But the whispers turned to gaps when Richard's elegant wife, Eleanor, approached them. With the poise of a queen and the ice of a winter storm in her voice, she didn't cause a scene. She simply looked at the jewels and said 4 words that shattered the evening. "That is my grandmother's." This isn't just a story about infidelity. It's about a hidden legacy, a brazen theft, and a wife who refused to be erased. The air in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was thick with the scent of money and magnolias. It was the annual Heart's Embrace Charity Gala, the undisputed pinnacle of New York's philanthropic calendar. Women in couture gowns that cost more than a family car floated through the room, their laughter tinkling like the Swarovski crystals hanging from the chandeliers. Men in impeccably tailored tuxedos spoke in hushed, confident tones about stock portfolios and summering in the Hamptons. And at the center of one of the most powerful constellations in this glittering galaxy was Eleanor Vance. At 48, Eleanor was the epitome of old money elegance. She wore a deep navy silk gown by Carolina Herrera, a designer she'd known personally for years. It was understated classic and fiercely expensive. Around her own neck was a simple 3-strand pearl necklace, a wedding gift from her parents. She didn't need to shout for attention. Her presence was a statement in itself. Her family, the DeWitt clan, had been a cornerstone of New York society since the Gilded Age. They hadn't just attended galas. They had built the museums and libraries these galas were held to support. Her husband, Richard Vance, was a different breed. He was new money, a corporate raider with a shark's smile and a reputation for ruthless efficiency. He had torn through Wall Street like a hurricane, and when he'd married Eleanor 25 years ago, it was seen as the ultimate merger, her class and connections with his ambition and brute financial force. Together they were an institution, the Vances. Their name was etched onto hospital wings and university faculties. But for the past year, their institution had felt more like a prison to Eleanor. A beautiful gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. The shared smiles for the cameras felt brittle. The easy affection they once had was replaced by a sterile, polite distance. Richard was always on his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen in hushed fury. He had late-night meetings that stretched into the early hours of the morning, and business trips from which he returned, smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers. Eleanor wasn't a fool. She was a DeWitt. She saw the signs, heard the whispers from her circle of friends, but she had chosen a path of dignified silence. For their children, Thomas now at Stanford Law, and Lily finishing her art history degree at Columbia. For the legacy of their name. She believed, perhaps naively, that this was a phase, a midlife crisis that would burn itself out. She would endure. "Eleanor, you look absolutely radiant," a voice cooed beside her. It was Beatrice Chadwick, a woman whose face was pulled so tight she looked permanently surprised. "Beatrice, lovely to see you." Eleanor smiled, a practiced, perfect arc of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "Richard is on fire tonight," Beatrice continued, gesturing with her champagne flute towards the stage, where Richard was pledging a staggering $500,000 to the Children's Cardiac Care Unit. The room erupted in applause. He stood there, soaking it in a benevolent king, bestowing gifts upon his subjects. He caught Eleanor's eye and gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, See, we are perfect. Eleanor felt a familiar coldness seep into her chest. It was all a performance. The devoted husband, the generous philanthropist. It was a brand he curated as meticulously as his stock portfolio. Later, as the auction began, Richard excused himself. Need to take a call with the Tokyo office. You know how it is. He patted her hand, a gesture so condescending it made her skin crawl. She watched him walk away, not towards the quiet lobby, but towards a secluded alcove near the terrace. He pulled out his phone, and the ghost of a smile, a genuine smile, the kind she hadn't seen directed at her in years, touched his lips as he typed. She turned her attention back to the auctioneer, trying to focus on the glittering array of items up for bid a week on a private yacht in the Aegean, a Picasso sketch, a walk-on role in a Martin Scorsese film. Anything to distract from the gnawing emptiness beside her. Her best friend, Sarah Kingston, a formidable divorce attorney with eyes that missed nothing, slid into Richard's empty seat. He's pledging $500,000 to sick kids while simultaneously making you sick to your stomach. The irony is thicker than the truffle oil on these canapes. Sarah muttered, her voice a low growl. Eleanor gave a weak smile. Sarah, please. Not tonight. Fine, Sarah sighed, squeezing her hand. But just know that when you're ready to stop enduring and start fighting, I have the entire firm of Kingston & Associates on standby. Pro bono, darling. It would be my distinct pleasure to dismantle him. Just as Sarah spoke, a ripple of excitement went through the room. It wasn't for the auction. The energy had shifted heads, turning towards the grand entrance. A murmur snaked through the tables. Eleanor followed their gaze, and her heart didn't just drop. It plummeted, shattering into 1,000,000 icy shards in the pit of her stomach. Standing there, framed by the marble archway, was Amber Collins. Amber was 26, a former brand consultant who had suddenly become a fixture on the society pages. She was everything Eleanor was not: loud, flashy, and utterly unapologetic. She was poured into a shimmering fire-engine red Versace gown that left little to the imagination. Her blonde hair was styled in voluminous waves, and her smile was dazzlingly white. She was a supernova in a room of quiet constellations, and she was heading directly for the main Vance Foundation table. But it wasn't her presence alone that made Eleanor's blood run cold. It was what was glittering around her neck. A necklace. A cascade of brilliant cut diamonds, so large they seemed to capture and hold all the light in the room. They were intricately woven together in a platinum setting reminiscent of Belle Epoque craftsmanship, and at its heart, resting in the hollow of Amber's throat, was a sapphire. It wasn't just any sapphire. It was a flawless cornflower blue cushion-cut stone, at least 50 carats, so deep and vivid it looked like a piece of the midnight sky. Eleanor's breath hitched. Her hand flew to her own pearls, the smooth, familiar orbs, suddenly feeling like a child's toy. She knew that necklace. She had traced its every curve in old photographs. She had read about its history in her grandmother's journals. It was a masterpiece designed by Van Cleef & Arpels in 1925 for her grandmother, Anneliese de Witt. It was a one-of-a-kind piece, legendary in certain circles, known simply as the Star of Anneliese. And it was supposed to be locked away in the Vance family's private vault at the J.P. Morgan facility on 57th Street. The world seemed to slow down, the ambient chatter of the gala, fading into a dull, distant roar in Eleanor's ears. All she could see was the necklace. It was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a repository of memories, a tangible link to a woman she had adored. She remembered her grandmother Annalise, a woman of formidable grace and quiet strength, wearing it at her golden wedding anniversary. She remembered the stories how Annalise had worn it to meet President Roosevelt, how its cool weight felt against her skin when, as a small child, Eleanor was allowed to touch it for just a moment before it was put away. The star of Annalise was her inheritance. It was meant to be passed to Lily on her wedding day. It was priceless, not just in monetary value, though a recent appraisal for insurance purposes had placed it north of $10 million, but in sentimental worth. It was the heart of the DeWitt legacy. And now it was adorning the surgically enhanced décolletage of her husband's mistress. Amber Collins moved with the predatory grace of a panther. She knew every eye was on her, and she reveled in it. She wasn't just attending the gala, she was making a statement. This wasn't a quiet affair. It was a public coronation. As she navigated the tables, people fell silent. The air crackled with scandal. She was heading straight for Richard, who had reappeared from his phone call and was now standing near the stage, looking for all the world like he had no idea she was even there. "Oh my God!" Sarah breathed, her legal mind instantly calculating the sheer unmitigated audacity. "That son of a bitch! That is not just cheating, Eleanor. That is a declaration of war." Amber reached Richard, her red-gloved hand resting possessively on his tuxedoed arm. He turned a look of faux surprise on his face that was so poorly acted, it was insulting. "Amber, what a surprise to see you here." "Richard, darling." She purred, her voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "I just couldn't resist, and I had to wear your beautiful gift. It felt like the perfect occasion." She tilted her head, a calculated gesture designed to make the sapphire catch the light. A collective soft gip rippled through the onlookers. A gift. He had gifted her the DeWitt family heirloom. The humiliation washed over Eleanor in a scalding wave. It was one thing to be cheated on. It was another thing entirely to have her family's history, her own legacy stolen and flaunted in her face in front of the very society she was expected to lead. Richard hadn't just been unfaithful. He had desecrated something sacred. He was trying to erase her to replace her not just in his bed, but in her own life story, using the very symbols of that story to do it. Something inside Eleanor, something that had been dormant for years, snapped. The quiet endurance, the dignified silence, it all evaporated, replaced by a cold, clear and focused rage. She was not just a Vance by marriage. She was a DeWitt by blood. And the DeWitts did not crumble. They fought. With a calmness that terrified even herself, she rose from her chair. Her movements were fluid and deliberate. Sarah reached for her arm, a silent plea to reconsider. But Eleanor gently shook her head. This was not a confrontation Sarah could handle for her. This was hers alone. She glided between the tables, the whispers following her like the train of a funereal gown. The sea of faces parted before her. She saw pity and some morbid curiosity in most. She ignored them all. Her eyes were locked on the necklace. Richard saw her coming. A flash of genuine panic crossed his face before he masked it with his usual arrogant smirk. Amber, however, looked triumphant. She stood taller, a smug smile playing on her lips, ready for the hysterical wife to make a scene, to cry, to scream. She was expecting a melodrama that would solidify her position as the victor. Eleanor gave her none of it. She stopped a respectable 2 feet from them. She didn't look at Richard. She didn't even look at Amber's face. Her gaze was fixed coolly and analytically on the jewelry. She let the silence stretch, forcing every eye in the room to follow her gaze to focus not on the scandal, but on the object at the center of it. Finally, she lifted her eyes and met Amber's. Her voice, when it came, was not a shout or a sob. It was perfectly level, clear as a bell, and carried across the hushed room with chilling precision. "That is a beautiful necklace," Eleanor said, her tone conversational, as if she were admiring a piece in a museum. Amber's smile widened. It was a fatal mistake. "Thank you." Amber began, her voice dripping with condescension. "Richard has impeccable." Eleanor cut her off, not by raising her voice, but by simply continuing to speak her words, slicing through Amber's like a diamond blade through glass. It was designed in Paris in 1925 by Julian Arpels himself. The central sapphire is from the Kashmir region, renowned for its velvety blue hue. There are 256 individual diamonds totaling approximately 120 carats, set in a repeating pattern of laurel leaves, a symbol of victory. She paused, letting the details sink in. She saw the confusion on Amber's face, the growing dread in Richard's eyes. The guests leaned in, mesmerized. This was no ordinary catfight. This was something else entirely. Eleanor took a small step closer, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more personal, more lethal. "My grandfather commissioned it for my grandmother, Annalise DeWitt, to celebrate the birth of my father. She wore it for the last time on the day of my wedding." She finally looked at Richard, a flicker of profound disappointment in her eyes. "You know this, Richard. You were there." Then she turned her full attention back to a now pale Amber Collins, whose smug expression had dissolved into one of baffled horror. Eleanor delivered the final devastating blow. She didn't say, "That's mine." She didn't say, "Give it back." She smiled a thin, glacial smile that held no warmth and claimed her legacy with 4 simple, irrefutable words. "That is my inheritance." The gasp that swept the room was audible, a sharp, collective intake of breath. It was no longer just gossip. It was a public accusation of theft on a grand scale. Amber Collins froze her hand, instinctively flying to the necklace as if she could protect it. Richard Vance, for the first time in his public life, looked utterly and completely cornered. The performance was over. The gilded cage had just been blown wide open. In the deafening silence that followed Eleanor's declaration, 100 different dramas played out in the eyes of the onlookers. The shock, the scandal, the delicious high society horror of it all. Amber looked as if she'd been struck, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning panic. Richard, regaining a fraction of his composure, took a step forward, his voice a low, menacing growl, meant only for Eleanor. "Eleanor, you are making a scene. You are embarrassing yourself." He hissed, his eyes flashing with fury. "You've had too much champagne. Let's go home." He reached for her arm, attempting to physically remove her from the situation he had created. Eleanor pulled her arm back with a sharp, decisive movement that surprised him. The submissive wife he had taken for granted for years was gone. In her place stood a stranger, a calm, formidable woman who met his rage not with fear, but with a look of profound pity. "No, Richard," she said, her voice still unnervingly steady. "I am not going anywhere with you, but I suggest you have your lawyer contact my lawyer in the morning." She glanced pointedly at Sarah, who was now standing a few feet away, her expression a mixture of fierce pride and professional readiness. I believe you know Sarah Kingston." With that, Eleanor turned her back on him and on Amber. She didn't storm out. She didn't run. She walked with her head held high through the parted crowd. The whispers now were not just about infidelity, but about the audacity of the theft, the cold fury of the wife. She had not only exposed the affair, she had framed the narrative. She was not the victim. She was the arbiter of justice. As she passed the table of old family friends, Margaret Rothschild, a woman whose opinion held immense weight in their circle, caught her hand. "Your grandmother would be proud, Eleanor," she said quietly. Her eyes filled with respect. It was a small gesture, but it was everything. It was validation. It was the closing of ranks. Society had chosen its side. Sarah caught up with her in the lobby, already shrugging into her coat. "My driver is right outside. Let's go." The ride to Eleanor's Upper East Side townhouse, her townhouse inherited from her parents, another piece of the DeWitt legacy that Richard had merely occupied, was silent. Eleanor stared out the window at the blurred lights of the city, her mind a whirlwind. The adrenaline that had propelled her through the confrontation was beginning to fade, leaving behind a deep bone-aching tremor. As they stepped into the grand, marble-floored foyer, the silence of the house felt immense. The staff had retired for the night. It was just the two of them. Eleanor finally let her composure crack, sinking onto a brocaded armchair, her body trembling. "Did I do the right thing, Sarah?" She whispered the question hanging in the cavernous space. Sarah knelt before her, taking her cold hands. "The right thing, Eleanor, what you did tonight was biblical. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You defended your entire family history. You took a situation designed to humiliate you and turned it into his public execution. In the history of marital warfare, that was the Battle of Agincourt." A small, watery laugh escaped Eleanor's lips. "I just couldn't let her wear it. It felt like a violation, like he was stealing my grandmother's memory." "He was," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "And that's our legal angle. This isn't just a marital dispute over assets. That necklace is a specific, non-commutable inherited heirloom. It was never part of the marital pot. For him to take it from a vault he only had access to because he was your husband, and give it to his mistress. That's not just grounds for divorce, Eleanor. That's conversion. It's theft. And it's the leverage we are going to use to burn him to the ground." Eleanor looked up, her eyes clearing. The shock was receding, replaced by a steely resolve. "He will fight. He'll lie. He'll say he bought it for her, that it's a replica." "Let him," Sarah said with a grim smile. "He can't replicate 100 years of history. We can. First thing tomorrow morning, we get an emergency court order to have the necklace independently appraised and examined by an expert. We'll subpoena the security logs from the vault. We'll get a sworn affidavit from the family jeweler. Does the piece have any identifying marks?" Eleanor's mind sharpened, focusing on the details. "Yes. My grandmother had her initials ADW for Annalise DeWitt, and the year 1925 secretly inscribed by Van Cleef and Arpels on the back of the sapphire's platinum setting. It's almost microscopic. You'd only know it was there if you were told where to look." Sarah's eyes lit up. "That's it. That's the silver bullet. He won't know about that. He and his little tramp will hand it over thinking they can brazen their way through it, and we'll have them cornered." She stood up, pacing the foyer, her legal mind already mapping out the strategy. "This is what we do. We hit him fast and we hit him hard, before he can hide his assets or spin the story. I'll have a team from my firm at my office at 7 a.m. We'll file for divorce on grounds of adultery and misappropriation of assets. We'll file for an immediate freeze on all your joint accounts and an injunction to prevent him from entering this house or accessing the vault. Eleanor straightened her back a DeWitt once more. Do it. He'll try to paint you as unhinged, Sarah warned. The press will have a field day. Let them, Eleanor replied, her voice cold as ice. Richard has built his entire empire on an image of untouchable success and family values. I am about to show the world that his foundation is built on lies and theft. He cared more about his reputation than he ever did about me. Let's see how his reputation survives this. The plan was set. The battle lines were drawn. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the New York skyline, Eleanor Vance was not thinking about her broken heart. She was thinking about her grandmother's necklace. She was thinking about the laurel leaves that symbolized victory. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt ready for a fight. The allies were in place, the strategy was clear, and the war for her life, her legacy, and her future had just begun. Richard Vance did not come home that night. He fled the Gala with Amber in tow, a chaotic retreat under the glare of 100 smartphone cameras. The footage was already viral before they reached the glistening, impersonal lobby of the Mandarin Oriental, where Amber had been living in a suite paid for by a corporate credit card. The silence in the elevator on the way up to the 45th floor was thick with Amber's panic and Richard's simmering rage. The moment the suite door closed behind them, the dam broke. "What the hell was that, Richard?" Amber shrieked, tearing the magnificent necklace from her throat and throwing it onto a marble console table. The clatter of diamonds and platinum against stone was sickening. "She humiliated me in front of everyone. She called me a thief." "Lower your voice." Richard snapped his face a thunderous mask. He was pacing the length of the room, yanking at his bow tie as if it were a noose. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Flaunting that thing I told you it was a statement piece, not to wear it to an event where she would be—" "You gave it to me," Amber cried, her voice rising in hysteria. "You said it was a gift, a symbol of our future. You told me it was vintage from a private Sotheby's auction. You never said you stole it from your wife's crypt." "It's not stolen, you idiot!" he roared, finally rounding on her. "It's an asset. It was just sitting there in a box, wasted. I wanted to see it on a woman who was alive, vibrant, not on some relic in waiting." But even as he said the words, they sounded hollow, a weak justification for a catastrophic miscalculation. He had underestimated Eleanor. He had seen her quiet dignity as weakness, her tolerance as apathy. For years he had moved through their life with impunity, believing she would never challenge him, never risk the perfect facade they had built. He had thought giving Amber the necklace was the ultimate power move, a way to show his mistress she was the one who truly mattered, while simultaneously proving to himself that he was beholden to no one, not even to the hallowed history of the DeWitts. It had been an act of supreme arrogance, and it had just blown up in his face. His phone began to buzz incessantly. Texts from his business partners, his PR team, his board members. The story was spreading like wildfire through their elite circles. Richard Vance's wife publicly accuses his mistress of wearing stolen family jewels. It was a PR nightmare that threatened to unravel the carefully constructed image of a stable, powerful titan of industry. Okay, he said, forcing himself to calm down, to think like the predator he was. "This is damage control. First thing you say, nothing. To anyone. Not your friends, not your mother, and especially not the press. Are we clear?" Amber, sobbing now, nodded numbly. We need a story, he continued, thinking aloud. A solid one. Eleanor is unstable. She's been under a lot of stress. Menopause. It makes women irrational. She's seeing things, getting confused. The necklace. It's a replica. An exquisite one, but a replica. I had it commissioned for you as a gift. The original is safe in the vault. She's just having a hysterical episode. It was a slimy, sexist, and deeply cruel defense, but it was the only one he had. He grabbed his phone and dialed his lawyer Arthur Gould, a man as ruthless as he was, albeit with a law degree. Arthur, we have a situation, Richard said, his voice now calm and commanding. Eleanor had a bit of a public breakdown tonight at the Heart's Embrace Gala. You're going to be hearing from Sarah Kingston. Here's our position. My wife is unwell and confused. We're very concerned for her mental state. I commissioned a piece of jewelry for a friend, Miss Amber Collins, that bears a resemblance to a family heirloom, and Eleanor became hysterical. We need to get ahead of this. Arthur, ever the professional, was silent for a moment. A replica. Can you prove it? I will, Richard said firmly. I'll get the documentation. I'll call my guy at Cartier tomorrow, someone I trust. I'll pay whatever it takes to have papers drawn up, backdated, appraisals, receipts, sketches. The works. We'll say it was a custom job. He'll vouch for it. It's risky, Richard, Arthur warned. If they can prove the necklace she was wearing is the original, you're not just looking at a messy divorce. You're looking at perjury and fraud. They can't prove it, Richard said with a confidence he didn't feel. It's my word, and soon Cartier's paperwork against the ramblings of a scorned woman. Who are they going to believe? His next call was to Marcus Thorne, his oldest board member, and a man who valued stability above all else. Richard fed him the same story, Eleanor's unfortunate episode, his concern for her health, the misunderstanding over a gift. He painted a picture of a loving husband dealing with a tragic but private marital issue. This will blow over Marcus, Richard assured him. It's a domestic squabble, nothing more. It won't affect the business. But as he ended the call, he knew it was a lie. This was not a squabble. Eleanor had drawn a line in the sand, and she had done it with the full weight of the DeWitt name behind her. His final task was the most distasteful. He needed to neutralize the one person who could definitively identify the necklace the DeWitt family jeweler. The Dubois family had been handling the DeWitt collection for 3 generations. Their shop, Dubois & Fields, was a discreet institution off Madison Avenue. Old Mr. Dubois would know the star of Annalise better than anyone. Richard found the number and called despite the late hour. An elderly, slightly frail voice answered. Mir Dubois. Richard began his tone, a mixture of false concern and veiled threat. Richard Vance here. I'm afraid my wife Eleanor is going through a difficult time. She may be in contact with you about a piece of jewelry, her grandmother's necklace. She has some confused ideas about it. I need to be clear for the sake of her privacy and health. You are not to discuss any of our family's collection with anyone. Not even with Eleanor. All communication must go through my office. Is that understood? Our family's patronage of your establishment depends on your discretion. He hung up, leaving the threat hanging in the air. He had spun his web. The narrative of the unstable wife, the paperwork for the replica, the intimidation of the expert witness. It was a 3-pronged defense built on lies, deceit, and misogyny. He looked at the real necklace still lying on the console, its beauty now tainted by the ugliness of the situation. He had to get it back into the vault and replace it with a fake before anyone could get a court order. The race was on. He had played his hand. Now he had to wait and see if Eleanor would call his bluff. While Richard was frantically constructing his fortress of lies, Eleanor was methodically gathering the stones of truth. She woke after a few hours of restless sleep, not with tear-stained eyes, but with a clarity of purpose she hadn't felt in decades. The initial shock and humiliation had burned away, leaving behind the cool, hard resolve of her ancestors. Her first call was not to a friend or a family member, but to Mr. Dubois. She knew Richard would try to get to him. She needed to reach him first. "Mr. Dubois, it's Eleanor Vance," she said, her voice warm but firm. "I apologize for the early hour." "Eleanor, my dear girl." His voice was kind, but she could hear a distinct strain of anxiety in it. Yes. I received a call from your husband last night." "I imagined you might have," Eleanor said calmly. "He likely told you I was unwell or confused. He may have threatened to withdraw your business." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "He was very insistent on my discretion," Dubois admitted carefully. "Of course he was," Eleanor said. Mr. Dubois. My father considered your father his most trusted confidant in matters of our family's collection. I am hoping I can place that same trust in you. What I am about to ask of you is a matter not just of business, but of legacy. My grandmother's legacy." She laid out the situation clearly and concisely, without emotion. The theft from the vault, the public spectacle, Richard's inevitable claim that the necklace was a replica. "He wants to erase my family's history, Mr. Dubois. He is counting on people like you to be silenced. I am counting on your integrity." The old man was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, the anxiety was gone, replaced by a steely resolve that matched her own. "Your grandmother, Annalise, was one of the finest women I have ever known. It was my father who oversaw the inscription of her initials on the star of Annalise. The Dubois family does not bow to bullies, Mrs. Vance. We stand by our clients, and we stand by the truth. Any records? Any original design sketches? Any private correspondence you need? They are yours. I will prepare a sworn affidavit testifying to the necklace's unique, identifiable markers." Relief washed over Eleanor. "Thank you, Jean-Luc. That means more than you know." Her next stop was the J.P. Morgan private vault, accompanied by Sarah and 2 junior lawyers from her firm, armed with a freshly signed court order, preventing Richard from accessing the vault. She presented herself to the stern-faced manager. The court order also demanded the immediate release of all security logs for the past 6 months. Inside the cold, sterile viewing room, a guard delivered the large, velvet-lined box that was supposed to contain the Star of Annalise. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. As she expected, it was empty. The indentation in the silk where the masterpiece should have rested was like an open wound. "Now for the logs," Sarah said, her voice sharp and businesslike. A manager brought in a thick printout. Sarah's perfectly manicured finger ran down the columns of dates and times. "Here," she said, her voice tight. 6 weeks ago, Richard Vance. Accessed at 4:15 p.m. on a Friday. Stayed for exactly 8 minutes. That's it. That's when he took it. The evidence was mounting. But Eleanor wanted more. She wanted the story. That afternoon, she went to the one place Richard could never touch, her parents' library, in the townhouse, a room he always found stuffy and outdated. She ran her fingers along the leather-bound books, until she found what she was looking for, a set of what deep blue diaries. Her grandmother Annalise's journals. For hours, Eleanor sat surrounded by the scent of old paper and leather, piecing together the life of the necklace. She found the entry dated October 1925, written in elegant cursive script. My dearest Charles presented me with the most breathtaking creation tonight, a necklace from Van Cleef and Arpels to celebrate the birth of our son. He calls it the Star of Annalise. At its center is a sapphire, the color of the summer sky over Provence. Julien Arpels himself showed me the secret. He has etched my initials ADW into the setting, a private whisper just for me. This is not a jewel to be locked away. It is a promise, a piece of our family's heart that will be passed down through the generations. Eleanor found photographs tucked between the pages. Annalise wearing the necklace at a state dinner, her smile radiant. A black and white photo of a much younger Eleanor, age 5, staring in awe as her grandmother fastened the clasp. She found the original bill of sale from Van Cleef and Arpels and the initial insurance appraisal from Lloyd's of London. She was not just building a legal case, she was reclaiming her own story. Richard had tried to reduce the necklace to a mere object, a trinket, to be given to his mistress as a trophy. But as Eleanor sat there, surrounded by the weight of her family's history, she understood its true power. The Star of Annalise was not just a collection of gems. It was a testament to love, legacy, and the enduring strength of the DeWitt women. By the time Sarah returned that evening with a team of forensic accountants, Eleanor had assembled an entire dossier on the coffee table. The photographs, copies of the journal entries, the original receipts, and a letter of intent from Mr. Dubois. "My God, Eleanor," Sarah said, picking up a photo of Annalise. "This is more than a legal case. This is a biography." "That's exactly what it is," Eleanor said, her voice filled with a newfound strength. And Richard wrote himself out of it the moment he laid his hands on that necklace. One of the accountants, a young, sharp-eyed man named David, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Vance, we've started a preliminary trace on your husband's finances. We found something. 6 weeks ago, the same day he accessed the vault, he liquidated a portfolio of municipal bonds held in a joint trust account, an account you were a signatory on, but hadn't looked at in years. The withdrawal was for 250,000. "For what?" Sarah asked. "We're still tracing the final destination," David said, "but the initial transfer went to an LLC we've never seen before. AC Enterprises." Eleanor and Sarah exchanged a look. AC Amber Collins. "What is AC Enterprises?" Eleanor asked. "As far as we can tell," David replied, "it's a shell corporation whose only function for the past year has been to pay the lease on a penthouse suite at the Mandarin Oriental and the monthly payments on a new Maserati." The final piece clicked into place. Richard hadn't just stolen the necklace. He had been systematically embezzling from their shared assets to fund his affair. The theft of the heirloom wasn't an isolated act of arrogance. It was the most blatant symptom of a much deeper betrayal, a cancer of deceit that ran through the heart of their entire financial life together. The web Richard was weaving was one of lies, but Eleanor's was woven from indisputable fact, historical record, and now a clear financial paper trail. The battlefield was no longer just the ballroom of the plaza. It had expanded to the vaults, the boardrooms, and the courts, and Eleanor Vance was armed and ready. The morning after the gala, the war began not with a shout, but with the quiet, devastating efficiency of the law. At precisely 900 a.m., a legal courier delivered a document to Richard's lawyer, Arthur Gould, so thick it landed on his desk with the authority of a tombstone. It was Eleanor's petition for divorce, and it was a masterpiece of strategic annihilation. Sarah Kingston had left no stone unturned. It detailed the adultery with cold precision, cited the grand theft of a multi-million-dollar heirloom, and most critically alleged a pattern of gross financial misconduct, demanding an immediate and comprehensive audit of every asset bearing the Vance name. Simultaneously, a court official served a subpoena on a terrified Amber Collins at the Mandarin Oriental, demanding she surrender the necklace to the neutral custody of Christie's auction house for expert verification. Richard, on a frantic call, ordered her to comply. "It's a replica, remember?" He snarled, his voice tight with a panic he couldn't conceal. "I have the paperwork from Cartier. We will bury her in documentation." He was betting everything on a desperate bluff, a fortress of forged papers he was paying a fortune to erect. He failed to realize Eleanor was no longer attacking the fortress. She was systematically blowing up its foundations. While Richard focused on the lie of the necklace, Eleanor, Sarah, and a team of forensic accountants had turned her townhouse library into a war room. They followed the money, and the trail they uncovered was more rotten than Eleanor had ever imagined. The accountants, led by a brilliant young man named David, quickly found that AC Enterprises, the shell company funding, Amber's life was just the tip of a treacherous iceberg. For years, Richard had treated their joint trusts and Eleanor's DeWitt inheritance as his personal slush fund. He'd embezzled millions to cover secret investments, pay off other women, and fund a life of reckless extravagance. He had leveraged the stable blue-chip DeWitt assets to secure high-risk loans that now threatened the entire corporation. "The theft of the necklace wasn't just ego, Eleanor," David explained, pointing to a dizzying flowchart of hidden accounts. "It was desperation. We believe Vance Industries is over-leveraged." He likely took the star of Annalise to use as collateral for a private off-the-books loan to cover a margin call. Giving it to Amber was just his hubris, taking a victory lap. This discovery transformed Eleanor's fight from a personal crusade into a corporate imperative. Armed with this damning financial intelligence, she made her move. She didn't confront Richard. Instead, she invited the 3 senior members of his board, led by the venerable Marcus Thorne, to her home. They arrived expecting to mediate a messy, emotional divorce. They were met by a calm, resolute CEO-in-waiting. With Sarah by her side, Eleanor laid out the case not as a scorned wife, but as the primary stakeholder, whose family money formed the bedrock of their company. She presented the irrefutable evidence of the necklace's theft, then had David give a chilling 10-minute summary of Richard's financial crimes. She showed them how his personal recklessness had placed their entire corporation on the brink of disaster. "Richard has become the single greatest liability to the company we all built," Eleanor stated, her voice resonating with cold authority. "When this becomes public, and without my intervention, it will the SEC investigation and the resulting scandal will gut the stock and shatter shareholder confidence. His personal corruption will be the company's epitaph." Marcus Thorne was pale. "What is it you want, Eleanor?" "I want to save my company," she countered. "I am offering you a choice. Stand with a thief and watch this corporation burn, or facilitate a clean, swift transfer of power. I want Richard's immediate resignation. I want his board seat and his controlling voting shares transferred to me as part of our divorce settlement. In return, I will handle this matter discreetly. The scandal dies today." It was a bloodless coup executed with surgical precision. The board members were stunned. They were being asked to oust their founder, but the alternative she presented, total corporate implosion, was unthinkable. You have until the conclusion of our meeting at Christie's tomorrow to decide. Eleanor finished, leaving them to contemplate the abyss. That final meeting took place in a sterile conference room at Christie's, the air thick with tension. On one side of the table sat Eleanor, poised and regal, with Sarah and the elderly, dignified jeweller, Mr. Dubois. On the other side, a haggard Richard and his lawyer, Arthur Gould. In the centre, on a black velvet tray, the star of Annalise glittered defiantly. A renowned gemologist, Dr. Albright, began the examination. Richard clutched his portfolio of forged Cartier documents, his last line of defence. Dr. Albright picked up the necklace, her expert eyes missing nothing. She examined the diamonds, the platinum, the setting. "The craftsmanship is of the highest order," she announced, her tone neutral. "Consistent with the work of Van Cleef and Arpels from the 1920s. And with a perfect replica," Arthur Gould interjected weakly. Dr. Albright ignored him, turning her loupe to the back of the massive sapphire. The room was silent. Richard's jaw was clenched so tight, a muscle pulsed in his cheek. "Ah," the gemologist said softly before looking up, her gaze piercing Richard. "Mr. Vance, your submitted paperwork is highly detailed, yet it makes no mention of the microscopic maker's mark inscribed here on the setting." She looked directly at Eleanor's team. "It reads, ADW 1925. A collective sharp intake of breath was the only sound. It was the silver bullet, the secret detail Richard could never have known. As his lawyer began to stammer about forgeries, Mr. Dubois spoke, his voice imbued with the weight of history. "It is no forgery. My father witnessed Julien Arpels make that very inscription. His personal journals, which I have here, document it explicitly." He slid a notarized copy across the table. The lie was dead. Richard's face crumpled in defeat. But Eleanor was not finished. This wasn't just about reclaiming a necklace. It was about reclaiming her life. Sarah pushed a thick binder into the center of the table. "Now that we have established my client is the victim of grand larceny," she began, her voice like ice, "we can discuss the contents of this file. It is a preliminary report from our forensic accountants detailing years of embezzlement and corporate fraud. We were on the verge of submitting it to the district attorney and the SEC. The threat of prison, stark and real, finally landed, shattering the last of Richard's composure. Eleanor spoke for the first time, her voice calm and devoid of emotion. "Here are my terms, Richard. This is not a negotiation. You will resign from Vance Industries, effective immediately. You will cede your board seat and transfer all of your controlling shares to me in a sealed divorce settlement. You will walk away with a nominal severance and sign a permanent non-disclosure agreement. In return, this binder remains closed. My goal is to protect the company, not to see you in jail." She stood up, the undisputed victor. "You have 1 hour to sign." There was no choice to make. Richard, the great titan of industry, gave a single, shuddering nod of defeat. His empire had crumbled undone by a century-old secret etched in platinum. Eleanor walked to the table. She picked up the star of Annalise, its familiar cool weight a comfort in her hand. She did not look at Richard again. Holding her head high, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving the man who had tried to erase her to face the ruins of his own making. The battle was over, and she had won everything. And so the story of the Vance divorce never became the tabloid spectacle it could have been. Richard Vance quietly resigned, citing health reasons, and disappeared from the public eye. Amber Collins, stripped of her benefactor and her ill-gotten gains vanished back into obscurity. But Eleanor Vance, well, she was just getting started. She took her seat at the head of the boardroom of what became, under her leadership, the DeWitt Vance Corporation, steering it with an integrity and vision it had lacked for years. The star of Annalise was not locked away. Eleanor wore it not as a symbol of painful memories, but as a reminder of her own strength, a testament to the quiet power that lies in legacy truth, and a woman who finally decided she would no longer be silenced. Her story is a powerful lesson that sometimes the most valuable things we inherit aren't jewels, but the courage to fight for what is rightfully ours. What did you think of Eleanor's incredible journey from a silent wife to a corporate powerhouse? Let me know your favorite moment of her epic comeback in the comments below. If you found her story as inspiring as I did, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength, and don't forget to subscribe for more true life stories of justice and empowerment. Thank you for listening.